Number 1 is the legend of the London Hammer. You have to form a complete picture of Central Texas, right in the middle of 1936. A local family is out for a quiet afternoon walk near a dry, dusty creek bed. They are not looking to upend the scientific establishment. Someone happens to kick a loose piece of river stone and it splits open. Staring right back at them is an absolute physical impossibility. A slightly rusted, completely normal iron hammer attached to a wooden handle. It looks exactly like something you would buy at a hardware store, the kind of tool your grandfather would keep in his shed. But there is a massive reality-breaking problem. This perfectly normal hammer is totally encased inside a solid rock formation that local enthusiasts eagerly claimed was millions upon millions of years old. Naturally, people completely lost their minds. The story exploded from local gossip into the broader public consciousness over the following decades. People argued that this single rock was absolute proof that humans were smelting iron and building houses during the exact same period that the greatest dinosaurs were walking around the plains. The alternative theory was even more disruptive. Standard geological dating methods were a complete scientific hoax, and the entire Earth was actually barely a few thousand years old. But standard, boring professional geology has a remarkably effective and completely natural trick up its sleeve. The phenomenon is called a concretion. Think of a natural concretion exactly like a geological oyster making a pearl. When you drop a perfectly modern object into the right kind of mineral-rich mud, something interesting happens out of sight. The water surrounding the buried object begins to slowly evaporate or changes its chemistry. It leaves behind dissolved, hardening minerals. These minerals crystallize tightly around the object and act exactly like a rapid-setting cement. The mud grabs onto the object and essentially builds a hard, rocky shell entirely around it. Under the right combinations of chemistry and water flow, this process does not take millions of years. It can happen in a few short decades. A miner dropping his iron hammer into the mud in the late 1800s could easily be found wrapped inside a solid nodule of hard rock by a family walking past in 1936. The hammer itself was never accurately dated by a proper laboratory because the owners refused to allow independent scientists to take core samples. It sits in a small private museum today, holding on to its mystery primarily because it is kept far away from modern testing equipment. It is not an ancient time traveler. It is just a victim of fast-acting geology. Number 2 is the Dorchester pot. This story requires a bit more explosive energy. In the hot summer of 1851, construction workers in Dorchester, Massachusetts, were clearing solid land for new development. They drilled deep holes into the bedrock of Meeting House Hill, packed those holes tight with black powder, and blew the solid rock to massive, jagged pieces. When the dust settled, they found something that made absolutely no logical sense. Sitting in the middle of the shattered rubble was a small, delicate, bell-shaped metal vessel, split perfectly in two by the force of the blast. It was about 4.5 inches tall. The metal appeared to be an alloy of zinc and silver. The most shocking part was the intensely detailed craftsmanship. Delicate silver flowers were inlaid around the body, and a decorative vine pattern circled the base. It was undeniably crafted by human hands. The Boston Transcript ran the story immediately, and it gained massive status when Scientific American reprinted the account the next year. Here is the reality-breaking problem. The rock it was blasted from is known as the Roxbury conglomerate. That formation is roughly 570 million to 593 million years old. That is the Ediacaran period, a time before complex multicellular life even existed on Earth. There were barely jellyfish in the ocean, let alone Victorian silversmiths making floral vases. The theories started instantly. Ancient aliens dropping their favorite teacups was a popular one. But skeptics who actually looked at the published drawings pointed out something very mundane. The vessel looked exactly like a standard 19th century pipe holder or an Indian hookah base. Extremely common objects in 1850s parlors. So how does a pipe holder get inside prehistoric rock? Without a controlled excavation, the most likely answer is that it did not. Exploding rock with black powder is an exceptionally chaotic, messy process. The object probably fell out of a worker pocket or tumbled unnoticed into a crack in the stone right before the blast went off. When the smoke cleared, it looked to the untrained eye like it came from inside the rock. Conveniently, the Dorchester pot has vanished into history. No museum holds it. No lab has ever tested the metal. Funny how the most reality-breaking objects always seem to get lost in the mail before real scientists can get their hands on them. Number 3 is the Wolf's Egg iron. Imagine a dark Austrian iron foundry in 1885. A worker named Riedel is tasked with breaking up massive blocks of coal to feed the blazing furnaces. He swings his pick at a stubborn block of lignite coal. The block splits open, and out drops a remarkably oddly shaped, heavy cube. It was not a rough, natural lump. It was a shaped piece of iron weighing nearly 2 pounds. It had 4 flat faces and 2 slightly rounded ends. What made it look manufactured was a neat, continuous groove cut right around its middle, like a tight belt. The coal it fell out of was mined at the local Wolf's Egg facility. That coal vein was geologically dated to be at least 20 million years old. The scientific community in 1886 actually took this seriously. Mining engineer Adolf Gerlt published a paper suggesting it was a weirdly shaped genuine meteorite that had fallen into the ancient swamps that eventually formed the coal around it. That sounded reasonable for the 19th century, but science marches on. 80 years later, in the 1960s, scientists at the Vienna Natural History Museum ran modern electron beam microanalysis on the object. If this cube was a meteorite, it would absolutely have trace amounts of nickel and cobalt. Those elements are the universal fingerprints of space metal. The lab found exactly 0 nickel and 0 cobalt. The meteorite theory died right there on the lab table. Researchers realized the iron matched standard pieces of industrial mining machinery. A piece of machinery ballast likely cracked off and fell into the coal seam during the mining process. Unlike most mystery objects, this one has not disappeared. It is sitting on public display in the Heimathaus Museum in Austria. It is a very real, heavy chunk of shaped metal. It is just a few decades old instead of 20 million. Number 4 is the Coso artifact. In the winter of 1961, 3 rock hunters were climbing the dry mountains of Eastern California looking for geodes to sell in their gem shop. They picked up a rock crusted with ancient fossil shells. The next day, they ran it through a diamond saw, expecting to find beautiful crystals. Instead, the saw blade ruined against a solid chunk of metal. What they found inside was a white porcelain cylinder surrounding a metal core with a small spring at the end. It completely resembled a modern machine part. The rockhounds immediately declared that based on the fossil shells, the rock had to be 500,000 years old. Alternative history magazines ran with it. People claimed it was an ancient capacitor or a spark plug for a prehistoric flying machine. The reality is grounded and somewhat embarrassing for the finders. In 1999, investigators took clear X-ray images of the artifact and sent them directly to the Spark Plug Collectors of America. Yes, that is a genuine organization. The collectors took one look at the X-rays and laughed. They identified the object immediately. It was a standard Champion brand spark plug manufactured in the 1920s for a Ford Model T engine. So how does a 1920s Ford part end up inside a supposedly ancient rock? The answer is that the rock was not ancient. Weather and mud can cement around garbage surprisingly fast, creating an iron oxide nodule that looks exactly like ancient stone. The fossil shells on the outside were just picked up by the hardening mud. A miner drove a Model T into the California desert in the 20s and threw a broken spark plug into the sticky mud. Decades later, It was a hardened geological mystery. Number 5 takes us deep underground for the Klerksdorp spheres. In the pyrophyllite mines of South Africa, workers have spent decades pulling hundreds of strange little round objects out of the deep rock walls. They are small, hard, bluish metallic-looking balls. Some are perfect smooth spheres, while others look slightly squashed like a disc. What makes them look undeniably manufactured is that many feature 3 perfectly parallel grooves etched right across the center equator. Here is the massive headache for historians. The rock layer these sit embedded inside is dated to 2.8 billion years old. That is before trees or dinosaurs or even basic fish existed. The internet went wild with theories about ancient civilizations printing metal spheres. A massive rumor spread that NASA had tested the spheres and found them perfectly balanced to a zero-gravity tolerance level, proving they were an alien device. But geologists took these spheres into their laboratories and ran X-rays. They found no alien alloys. The spheres are made of standard natural hematite and wollastonite. They are just another version of the concretion. Billions of years ago, in layers of ancient volcanic ash, minerals slowly crystallized outward from a central, tiny grain of dirt. They grew spherically over millions of years, naturally, just like a jawbreaker. And those perfectly manufactured-looking parallel grooves, they are just natural weathering lines, formed by the settling layers of ancient ash they originally formed inside. They are beautiful acts of nature, but they were not dropped by an alien spaceship. Number 6 is the Kingoody nail. Picture a Scottish stone quarry in 1844. A worker is chipping away at a massive block of solid sandstone. Halfway through the stone, he uncovers a simple, rusted iron nail. The head sat near the surface, but the shank was secured deep inside 9 inches of hard rock. The sandstone was roughly 400 million years old, dating to the Devonian period. This find was not reported by a conspiracy theorist. It was reported by Sir David Brewster, a prominent 19th century physicist, which threw the scientific community into a minor panic. If this nail was real, it destroyed the timeline of human evolution. A manufactured iron tool existed before complex life even crawled onto land. But there is a massive catch. Brewster noted in his own report that the sandstone block was heavily fractured. The most boring but likely truth is that a modern nail was driven into a crack or accidentally fell into a crevice in the stone. Over a few years, water flow filled the crack with mud and mineral deposits, sealing the nail tightly. To an 1840s quarry worker, it looked like the nail was born inside the rock. No photographs exist. No museum has the nail. It is nothing more than a ghost story for geologists. Number 7 is the Williams Enigmalith. This one brings us into the modern era. In 1998, an electrical engineer named John Williams was hiking in an undisclosed location when he picked up a strange rock. Sticking out of the solid granite were 3 small metallic prongs, arranged exactly like an electrical plug you would push into your wall socket. The rock was estimated to be at least 100,000 years old. If genuine, it was absolute proof of an ancient advanced society. Williams had the rock X-rayed, and the scans showed an opaque internal structure connecting the prongs inside the stone. But skeptics point out a few bright red flags. The finder happens to be an electrical engineer. He refuses to say where he picked it up, destroying any hope of verifying the geological context. He listed the rock for sale at $500,000. He says scientists can study it, but only if he is present, and they promise not to scratch the rock. No major university lab has accepted those terms. You cannot find hidden joints or test the inner cement if you cannot scratch the surface. The Enigmalith sits in a strange limbo. It is either the greatest discovery in history or a very clever paperweight, built by an engineer with too much free time. Number 8 is the Iud wedge. We are in Romania in 1974. Construction workers were running an excavator in a 35-foot deep sandpit near a river. Deep in the earth, they pulled up 3 heavy objects. 2 were fossilized bones from an extinct mastodon elephant dating back at least 11,000 years. The third was a heavily corroded shape of metal covered in a thick oxide layer. When researchers ran the metallurgical tests, they dropped their clipboards. The wedge was made of 89% pure aluminum, mixed with copper and zinc. A completely modern aluminum alloy. Here is the problem. Pure aluminum does not exist in nature. It was not successfully manufactured by humans until the 1820s. Finding a manufactured aluminum wedge alongside an Ice Age elephant bone sounds like the opening scene of a science fiction movie. Alien enthusiasts claimed it was the broken landing gear from an extraterrestrial scout ship. But engineers looked closely at the shape and sighed. It is a dead match for a mechanical excavator bucket tooth. The construction workers literally lost a digging tooth off their machine into the exact hole they were digging. Aluminum alloys are used on heavy equipment near coal and gas deposits because, unlike steel, aluminum does not spark when it hits rock. They buried their own trash next to some elephant bones. The mystery is just a missing piece of heavy machinery. Number 9 is the Meister print. It is the summer of 1968. An amateur fossil hunter named William Meister is cracking open slabs of shale in Utah. He splits one open and freezes. Pressed into the solid rock is the distinct shape of a human right shoe print, about 10 inches long, with a deeply depressed heel impression. The rock is from the Cambrian era, meaning it is over 500 million years old. The truly insane part is what lay inside the footprint. Crushed into the center of the heel were 2 fossilized trilobites, ancient armored marine bugs that died out hundreds of millions of years before the first dinosaur existed. Creationists cheered. This was proof that humans and ancient bugs were walking around together, entirely disproving standard evolutionary timelines. But paleontologists took one look and shook their heads. When sedimentary rock layers break apart, they do not always break perfectly flat. They often break in curved patterns that accidentally look like familiar shapes. The geological term is called spalling. The trilobites were real. They are common in that mountain range. The shoe shape was not a shoe at all. It is just a very lucky fracture pattern. It looks like a shoe because the human brain is hardwired to recognize patterns in random noise. It is the same reason you see faces in clouds. The Meister print was an awesome coincidence hijacked by people who wanted to change history. Number 10 is the Antikythera mechanism. We saved this one for last because, unlike every other entry on this list, this out-of-place artifact is completely verified real by the actual scientific community. In 1901, sponge divers working off the coast of a small Greek island pulled a corroded green lump of bronze from an ancient shipwreck. The ship sank in the 1st century before the Common Era. The lump sat in a museum looking like green garbage for decades until advanced X-rays finally revealed the inside. It was packed with dozens of precision-cut, interlocking bronze gears. It was a functioning, mechanical, analog computer built over 2,000 years ago. It tracked the movements of the sun and moon and predicted eclipses with a mathematical perfection that Europe would not see again until medieval clockmakers came along 1,000 years later. This is not a weirdly shaped rock. This is not a misunderstanding. It is peer-reviewed, authenticated, ancient human technology that spent 2,000 years sealed in a rock-like concretion at the bottom of the ocean. It sits brightly lit in a museum in Athens, and it proves that the reality of human history is often far more incredible than the fake mysteries we invent on the internet. Humans were building literal computers in the age of bronze swords. The reality of provenance. When you hold a strange object, supposedly trapped in solid rock, the first question should never be about aliens or time travel. The first question must always be, who watched this thing come out of the ground? Where are the documented field notes from a neutral observer? A dramatic late-night photograph of an object sitting next to a ruler is completely worthless without a strict scientific chain of custody. We know that concretions form fast. We know that rocks constantly fracture and shift. We know that tired miners drop their tools all the time. The Earth is constantly churning and mixing. The modern world directly with the ancient one. A real out-of-place artifact would have continuous, unbroken geological layers, matching the exact age of the rock around it. Until an object passes that basic scientific test, it is simply an internet rumor wrapped in a very good story. Look at the rock. That is the only way to know the truth.